Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings, and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. Most folks would find it a quite difficult admission to cop to a dirty secret, though it be as plain as the wishful thinker's nose, as obvious as history's sorrowful evidence of this secret's perennial persistence. That secret sublet housed in their very gut is the fear of freedom. This would seem counterintuitive until you remember peer pressure. Many, if not most, live under the illusion that they want what they want, while in reality they want what others expect them to want. Listen to these words from Erich Fromm, the deeply respected American psychoanalyst born in Germany in 1900, and I quote, "By conforming with the expectation of others, by not being different, these doubts about one's own identity are silenced, and a certain security is gained. However, the price paid is high. Giving up spontaneity and individuality results in a thwarting of life. Psychologically, the automaton, while being alive, biologically is dead emotionally and mentally. Behind a front of satisfaction and optimism, modern man is deeply unhappy. As a matter of fact, he is on the verge of desperation. He desperately clings to the notion of individuality. He wants to be different, and he has no greater recommendation of anything than that he is different. We are informed of the individual name of things we personalize by having our initials of the owner put on them. All this indicates the hunger for difference, and yet the stuff we buy and collect represent, like our tattoos, the last vestiges of individuality that are left. Modern man is starved for life, a Prometheus again left unbound, yet tethered to the rock of the other's expectation. These others who also live with a comfortable, cozy cowardice. Erich Fromm, who died in 1980, was here quoted, but admittedly with my interlacings. For what you've just heard about conforming with the expectation of others reveals the persistence of ghetto gangs and gang mentality, which follows from the hood to the penitentiary, where they continue to carpet their bodies with tattoo gang clang symbols, which hide their fear of freedom with street cred codes and protocols. Our forefathers knew well what they were doing in shaping a new nation against those Tory neighbors who were called Tory because of their kissing up to the British, despite their harsh and indifferent governance and their imperial colonial occupation and usurpation. One, till this day, cannot rationally confuse our forefathers with one another. Adams, Franklin, Madison, Washington, nor Jefferson. Each was his own man, each his own John Hancock written lodge. Today's groupthink pursuits, today's political correctness bespeak a mistrust for free speech, particularly from the fundamentalist left, who are as progressive as the Tory in category and theory. Turning our backs on our forefathers requires the theatrical genius of a Neil Simon, who can comedically show today's odd coupling of fellow Americans in two acts, left and right. Or I should say left versus right. Speaking of theater reminds one of the amateur theatrics located in the community known as Washington, D.C., where the fear of freedom is disguised behind bureaucracy, formed behind barriers which prevent politicians from being exposed to their own incompetence and naturally fearing the electoral consequence. Thus, they let silent entities do their dirty work. Allow me to cite an example of the tyranny of bureaucracy in this America, that storied land that has heretofore brought teeming masses to our shores to escape the Reds, their slave bread, and the long red tape of their bureaucratic landscape, not to mention the regimentation of Nazi instrumentation in a scurried potpourri of disinformation. Here, my friends, and only here, asylum was found. But allow me to invite you to focus on the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. I owned a building in Manhattan and was, as owner, notified of my having to comply with furnishing each toilet with smaller tank commodes in order to save water in a period during which New York was suffering from drought. I obeyed so as not to be fined nor perceived as a bad citizen. Of course, these smaller tanks, not being as efficient as the old model, required double flushing to achieve the older result of just the one flushing. Ergo, however well-meaning, more water was wasted along with stubborn waste, which doesn't abide government edict. Does it ever? Now, at the same time, EPA placed on my premises one water meter for the entire building. When I pointed out the water usage should be metered for each apartment, for if a careless tenant leaves the water running, or a malicious one were to do so, it would be I who would endure the cost because rents are frozen for each guideline period by yet again another bureaucracy called the Department of Housing and Community Renewal, DHCR. Housing's anaconda, who thinks a la Jane Fonda. EPA said installing meters for each apartment was out of the question. No smuts, buts, or ifs. Well, to make a long story less tiresome, I'll hasten to the end. Tenants like me, they liked me very much and were careful with their water usage, so much so that the EPA suddenly raised its rates, raised them significantly, so much so that the annual water bill was higher than property taxes for my building. When I called waiting for an interminable period for someone to get on the other end, I ended up talking to a very honest but unsympathetic EPA employee. My argument cited that the drought was well over and that instead of rates falling or even remaining steady, they had risen sharply for no reason accessible to me. Thus, this campaign to conserve water was so successful, consumption had plummeted, he said, and so did their collection of revenue. Thus, with laughter in his continuing. Thus, the new increase to more than cover anticipated losses was imposed, yet reason, yes, you can see how reason was lost to their budget. And there you have it, my friends. You can imagine what global warming will do to your wallet. And now you can more than imagine what I mean by political cowardice hiding behind the cynical barriers of each and every bureaucracy, which is spawned to live on eternally. Read Franz Kafka, and you'll know the tyranny of government and the tyranny over the self, which ever continues to struggle. Now oddly, on American soil, thanks to the likes of EPA and DHCR, and on and on and on. Hence, let's move on to our struggle with President Obama. The gentleman has lasted rather than really wearing well. He's inclined to overplay his voice while underplaying his role. Were he a starring actor, the theater would have soon grown dark, for Obama merely behaves, he does not act. And thus we live in darkness barely even dimly lit by the drive-by media, the media and the crime syndicate called academia, a conglomerate of entitlement junkies who support the ever-burgeoning bureaucratic government establishment, who use giant eraser to scrub out their daily failures, replacing the blurry space with ever more of their preposterous innovations unto the theater of Obama-Rama, where the script is never erased but shredded. It was George Orwell in the novel Brave New World who said, and I paraphrase, that when a population live amid deception, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. Again, with all due respect, our forefathers would have understood that statement in full measure and in full measure of application. Yes, telling the truth is a well-perceived threat by the left which always must be of one mind, left uncleft, bereft of truth, for truth, my friends, is the theft of the left, its loot becoming failure's offshoot, that offshoot of oft-times of celebrity heft with Oscar benefits. Permit me to explain by exemplifying celebrity shame, those radical chic weekend activists who, as self-congratulatory ceremonies, reach their peak in political speak to wit, Patricia Arquette, who recently received Best Actress Oscar, clumsily held same with one hand, waving the other sheet of paper upon which she had written some comments supporting women's equality. As an actress, and note on Oscar night, females are no longer actors, as otherwise noted, but referred to as actresses. I suppose for clarity, otherwise lost to being one of the boys. But as I was saying, before politics rudely interrupted, Arquette's reading from a pre-written statement suggests the failure of memory, which quite naturally gains muscle from mentally digesting scripts actors later enact. The progressively inspired audience applauded loudly with Meryl Streep in the front row on her feet, clapping and nodding excessive approval as if she were Uriah Heep. You might remember that falsely humble Dickensian creep who can weep on cue like Streep. I hasten to say that artists who are nominated and or win the Oscar must be lauded for taking their work seriously. They are a credit to their peers in the industry. However, it's one thing to take your work seriously, but it should remain ever harder to take oneself seriously, particularly when celebrity is poorly seasoned with political statements ill-read and wretchedly conveyed. Such unmemorized script rings hollow, celebrity heft fallen to a propensity for merely things left. When in this country the equality of women or women is mentioned, I feel embarrassed not for us men, but for that type of female who never gives me a hint as to where I might land and find counterparts in this world who are more fortunate than American women as a whole. Where might one find liberated examples in the Islamic world about which they in ordinarily typical brush past and remain all hush, hush, despite genital mutilation, beheadings, stonings, kidnapping, rape, sold into slavery, and acid to etch the faces with the grotesquerie of masculine savagery? Yes, Arquette and Merrill, where is thy metal? Your very high-quality gifts, indifferently reduced to political drift and intellectual shoplift. I trust you get what I'm suggesting, and that is that many cowardly, unthinking celebrities like common folk live under the illusion that they want what they want, while in reality they want what others expect them to want. Hence, we get those standing ovations at the Oscars, which celebrate not artistry alone, but sophistry begowned in the diadem of truth, which stinks of group think. Apart from peer pressure and peer identity, I've always happily remained a stranger. Peer pressure I personally neutralized from an early age. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, never convinced yours truly, who from childhood when in Rome chose to do what a Romanian might do, whatever that might be. Because of my independence, the Italians loved me, as they do all who they welcome warmly, each in his own mutually memorable way. In fact, allow me a word about Italians. I have it on excellent authority and my own long experience that Italians have little faith in the dynamics of government. However superficially partisan they might appear, government is an abstraction they little relate to, and a distraction they resent viscerally. The only thing that matters to Italians is family. Touch the hair on the head of even a cousin twice removed, and you'll be dealing with a warrior. Place that warrior in a field of combat, and chances are he'll befriend the enemy, and in short order both will be sitting down to enjoy a generous plate of pasta and merrily discuss how to avoid taxes. Now, that's civilized to the nth degree of grace, refinement, and unfortunately, failure. Yes, failure, in the face of the likes of ISIS, who storm Christian museums to sledgehammer away at the carved beauty of the ages. All tyrannies, Western or Eastern in location, attempt the dislocation of rooted aesthetic perspective, so to leave a culture shorn of echoes and reminders of their greatness at its acme. The identity, I should say, the Nazis identify with Germany by erasing every trace of Jewish genius, such as the likes of the music of Felix Mendelssohn and the artistic and scientific reputations of Jewish intellectual giants. Mao did it in China during the misnamed Cultural Revolution, for the methodical destruction of pre-communist China was anything but cultural. I recall Chinese intellectuals marched through streets with pointed dunce caps on their bowed heads. This shameful fear of culture, this cowardly deconstructionism of past glories is the tyranny that one also finds on American campuses. All brats who would make bric-a-brac of beauty and bully the majesty, the miracle, and the mystery of the human imagination when in creative swing. Unflinching must we meet these dinglings, always with boots on the ground, to do some facelifting, so as to preserve, propagate, and later celebrate our civilization's underpinnings. American apologists steeped in self-hating apologetics, the give peace a chance mobs would end up giving the give beasts a chance slobs, who expatriate to and for ISIS training and deploy home to wreak havoc. It must be clear to all by now that what I said in my opening was an exposition and exposure of that dirty secret many of us folks are fearful of freedom, preferring to be terrorized by tyranny, which allows the freedom from ever again having to think. Unfortunately, they unthinkingly stand ready to impose and inflict terror upon their very own fellow Americans. There you have the Tory, the traitor, and the bottomless pit hater, alma mater's idolaters. They don't need, want, nor deserve our understanding. We must have a force and forces to extinguish their worldwide meandering. Ideology, in every disguise, it is as a disfigurement of the human spirit, which at its best doesn't shrink from fear of freedom, but is enraptured by the notion of the recapture of our individuality and human stature as God's creatures given free will, along with moral sanity and mental sanitation, well apart from ideological ligature in zealous agitation. Excuse me. Those ideologically predisposed to the leftist perspective are also disposed to sinister plots. In fact, sinister means left, or unlucky side in Old Latin. The left is persistently positioned to praise iconoclasm and its practices. In common parlance, an iconoclast is a person who challenges cherished beliefs and traditions institutions as being based on error and superstition. They become our self-righteous idol smashers, only to replace them with their very own idols to carol and extol unto a bomberama theatrical folderol, each representing blunder and repetitive failure. All in all, God and his creatures need ideals, not ideologies. These hot-to-trot iconoclasts are fairly easy to spot, for they pretend diversity and respect for others while eagerly expecting that we, yes, become one another in a desperate love knot. 'Tis, of course, all secular progressive tommy-rot. They believe in diversity in all things, surely, but not in thought, expecting you to venerate all that they and their bureaucracies consolidate. And so again, we are faced with this secret unspoken fear of freedom. Becoming one another is one ever-fattening lump of mainstream self-acceptance, the self which cowardly seeks to flee from the consequences of its flight from providence and reverence, escaping into transference, while promised the abstinence of turbulence. The left sees in this the quality of resplendence, the right which is not as ideological, the ideology never there, but a persuasion. That's what the right sees, not ideology, but a persuasion. It sees this as naught but fraudulence otherwise. Hence civilizations metastasized tumescence. What we should all seek is not images to smash, but a self-image that's been unmasked, an image aware of its individual DNA, individual fingerprints which should point to individual aptitudes, cleared of the smears of attitudes which only then become the prelude to serenity and quietude. Permit me a few more observations about our unspoken fear of freedom. Ultimately, we know deeply that the other side of every fear is freedom. Your past is not your potential. In any hour, you can choose to liberate the future. Fear is a question. What are you afraid of and why? Just as the seed of health is in illness. Because of illness, illness contains information. Your fears are a treasure trove, a treasure trove house of self-knowledge if you develop the courage to explore them. Fear is never a reason for quitting. It is only an excuse. Fear can keep us up all night long, but faith makes one fine pillow. Lastly, all of us are failures, at least the best of us are, unafraid to take risks. Freedom can be your servant or master, like fire. It can either warm or burn you. The former is freedom, which knows limits, while the latter consumes, leaving behind ashes alone. Therefore, to not squander freedom is will it to be your servant. Remember, when in Rome, fathom your own stardom, never the group's other phantoms. And though you may never win an Oscar, you'll nonetheless be stellar. Also remember to keep the faith. It's your life's very own salt cellar. In fact, it is the way to season your reason. Ciao, my friends.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.